the first 20 years of my life or so, I recall there being a lot of controversy about gay marriage and gays in the military. And, you know, from the very first time I thought of the issue, probably as a 10 or 11-year-old, I thought it was obvious that gay marriage should be legal. And I truly did not understand at all the opposition to it because I knew very few devout Christians in my life. I grew up in a suburb of New York, and I there was some kind of homophobia in my extended family that I could detect, but the answers seemed obvious to me, and then the answer legally came very quickly. Gay marriage became the law of the land, and the conversation seemed to have resolved itself on the right issue kind of quicker than I had expected. And then and trans issues were not very salient to me in the first, I would say, 18 years of my life. And then in the past 7, we've been dealing with a whole different set of questions. Not can you get married, but a set of questions that seem to me to have less obvious answers, like what should the protocol be for a kid with gender dysphoria? How many years of counseling should such a kid need to have before medically transitioning? What do we do with trans people who commit crimes and go to prison? Which prison do you go to? These sorts of questions seem to me a lot less obvious than the question people were asking in 2010 about should gay people be allowed to get married. And so that's kind of, I've felt I can often see both sides of the issue. And I guess broadly, it's incredibly difficult to be a person with gender dysphoria. It's an incredibly confusing and tough and unlucky lot to have. And there's a side of the conversation which quickly will support the pro-trans sort of side of the issue, or what's perceived as basically there was a set of questions about homosexuality and marriage that I thought were quite easy to answer in the past. And now there are a set of questions around gender identity and trans issues that seem much harder for me, but are often talked about as if they're as simple or as easy as the question of gay marriage. And so I'm curious, I gave you a mix of my biography and my general takes on these issues. How did you come to think about all of these issues, and maybe give me some of your biography too?
Yeah, so pretty similar trajectory to you, although I'm a bit older than you, and so gay marriage, for most of my life, gay marriage seemed like an impossibility. And I came out when I was 20, and at the time, it seemed like this was never going to happen. This was in the early 2000s. And, I would have friends who, up until 2015, when the Supreme Court legalized gay marriage, I would have friends who would have these ceremonies, and it always felt fake to me. It felt like two people sort of exchange, like two kindergartners exchanging ring pops. It seemed very symbolic, I suppose, but also fake. And so in 2015, this rapid shift. I'm from Western North Carolina. I came from a place where I didn't know any gay people. There was like two gay boys, two out boys in my high school. But gayness was so uncommon that it didn't even occur to me that I could be gay because nobody was gay. I was a kid when Ellen came out. I remember the years when, you would turn on talk radio and she was being called Ellen DeGenerate. It did seem very odd and freakish, even for somebody who was really sort of a little baby dyke. And I had when I was in high school, I had a group of friends. There were no lesbians in my high school. There's maybe one, like the head of the softball team, the pitcher or something like that. And, but for the most part, there was just no representation at all. After high school, of my group of friends, it turned out that three or four of us ended up marrying women. We were gay the whole time. We just didn't even it didn't even occur to us, or didn't occur to me at least, that this could be a possibility. So it took me sort of a while to even come to realize the fact that I was gay, which is sort of ironic because when I was in high school, people were also constantly telling me that I was a dyke, and I guess they they knew something I didn't. But so it was, I came from a not a super homophobic place, but a fairly homophobic place. And so when I grew up and moved to cities, I became immersed in this sort of queer culture. And I started meeting trans people around that time. And there were always trans guys not even on the periphery. There were always trans guys who were sort of welcome in lesbian spaces, but they were rare. There would be like one or two within the scene. And then that has changed really, really rapidly in the past couple of years. So I remember sort of first noticing this, and I think in 2014, I was living in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I had a friend there. My best friend there was a trans guy, and he lived in a house. He had been identified as a lesbian before, and he lived in a house with 4 or 5 other lesbians. And he came out, or queer women. The term lesbian has been out of fashion for a long time, but basically lesbians. And he came out as trans, and then within a year, everybody in his household had come out with trans. And he told me this, and I thought, like, this is statistically impossible. Something weird is going on here. This must be an anomaly. And so this was 2014, so however many, 6 years ago. And in that time, I have seen that pattern repeat among different households, different communities, different scenes, over and over and over. So when I moved to Seattle, I was friends with about 5 other dykes. 4 of them have had top surgery. 3 of them are on testosterone, and all of them either go by he, him, or they, them. I'm the only one of the group who is still a woman. And I have just seen this repeat over and over and over. And so something remarkable has changed, not just with the amount of attention that this receives, which is obviously a lot more than it was when I was a kid, and the only trans representation was like on Jerry Springer, and you would stay home from school, and there would be some story about a she-male that you could watch on your sick days. So obviously that has changed quite a bit. I think that there's a couple of forces at play here. I think part of it is that after the success of gay marriage, you had this infrastructure, groups like HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, and these various state and citywide groups that had been really focused on gay marriage for years. That was the issue. Gays in the military and then also gay marriage were the primary civil rights issues at the time. And they pivoted. They didn't say, "Oh, we did it. Let's fold up the tent and go home and get new jobs." They pivoted to trans rights. And I think that was really the start of this massive shift from focusing on gay rights, which for the most part have been solved on sort of a legal basis, at least. Although I think we're seeing a lot of backlash now to this focus on trans rights. And you can see this in things like the Human Rights Campaign. If you look at their annual reports and you search for words like trans or lesbian or gay, what you will find is much less focus on gay rights and much more focus on trans rights. And there is a rational reason for that. Gay rights is kind of solved, at least on a legal, if not cultural level. So I think that's what has happened. And that has come with some real consequences. The trans rights thing, it started out being about legal protections and people not being able to be fired for their jobs for their gender identity, or to have equal access to housing and things like this. And then, like many movements, it has crept and evolved and mutated into these tangential issues that I think are actually going to damage the cause of trans rights and damage the cause of gay rights. I think we're seeing a giant backlash right now to things like trans women in sports, youth puberty blockers, and I think ultimately this is going to be bad for genuinely dysphoric people as well as gays and lesbians. So it's a strange time. It's a strange time to be observing all of this and commenting on it.
I'm struck by your observation about these groups that formed in an era where gay people couldn't get married, and where it looked like gay people wouldn't be able to get married perhaps for decades. It looked like that might have been 20 years away. It's easy to forget, but You had Obama and Hillary probably as late as like, I don't know, 2012, pretty much signaling the party line, which was marriages between a man and a woman, even among Democrats. So to think that within the next 2 years it would be the law of the land, I mean, in a way, it was kind of a shocking victory, and maybe a Pyrrhic victory. It was like a victory that came too quick, and maybe, popped a balloon of a lot of legitimate and noble activist energy around the issue. And it's possible to be a victim of your own success, a victim of your own victory. Like, what this has happened on the issue of racism as well, which is all these organizations um, that formed, between 1910 and 1960 around the issue of civil rights. Once you get the major civil rights legislation passed in the mid 60s, they don't suddenly say, we won, everyone go home. Their institutions have an inertia and a kind of self-justification. People don't like to declare their own irrelevance, and it's kind of an unhappy situation or paradox for them to be in, because you can commit yourself to a really important issue, and God forbid you win, it becomes, you become this kind of you declare your own irrelevance, or you risk having to do that, or verge into things that are more and more minutia.
Yeah, I think you're totally right about this. Activists activate. That's what they do. They do activism, and I understand that, just sort of a self-preservation mode. You've spent your life working on this thing. It would feel more natural to pivot to the next thing, but the next thing is smaller and smaller and smaller, and then all of a sudden we're talking about trans women in women's sports, which I mean, if you think about the last 70 years of the civil rights movement, this is the thing that we're focusing on. Like, this is the issue of the day. In some ways, I think that shows a real success that, right now the big fights are over Leah Thomas and a, divorced father of two who wants to be called Brenda and use the women's room. In a way, there's some beauty to that. It shows that progress really has been made. But my main concern at this point, and I think we're seeing this right now, is this very real backlash that we're seeing, particularly in red states. I think there's a lot of panic over this, the drag panic this week. The week before, it was the groomer panic. And then we are seeing some very draconian and I think cruel bills come out of red states. And a lot of people have blamed Jesse, my co-host, in particular for this, because he and I have both written about youth gender dysphoria and detransition, and I think the logic goes, if you point out that this thing is happening, you are somehow responsible for the backlash to it. It's not logical, so I don't totally understand it.